Hello and welcome. This is the June 26th meeting of the Budget Task Force Subcommittee, focusing on budget challenges and potential new revenue sources, maybe a few other things we'll discuss today. And Jeremy will be taking notes, so thank you for that. I think what we could do today is just make sure that all of the existing action items have owners, or we split them apart into manageable pieces, and those have owners. And then we have some tentative deadlines, at least for our next draft. And then anything else we want to add to that would be fine. So unless there's any comment on that, I may ask Dan to go first because he's put together a nice first cut of the budget challenge document.
So we were just working on this today, editing this. What I feel like we should do is I'll walk everybody through this, and then maybe we make comments today. Everybody can look at it on their own time and may regroup on Wednesday to take another look at this, and any further information people want to include, we can go through it. But I took each of the budget challenges. I worked with Jenny on this. She did all the school ones, and we kind of came up with the first narrative for each of these. So if you don't mind, I'll walk you through.
That'd be great. And I think people can give feedback and discuss today, but if they want to think about it a little bit, maybe Dan, you could circulate this by PDF and people could respond to you directly if that's the best open meeting law way to get comments.
I think that'd be great. Do you want the PDF now, or do you want, so it's right in front of everybody? Would that help?
If that's real quick, you could do that and drop it in the notes. If not, I think we'll be fine to get it after.
Okay, maybe. All right, maybe we'll just wait till after, and we'll just keep going from here. Let's see here. All right, so first up, we have the solid waste and recycling. So both of our contracts are expiring at the end of FY24. So we recently went out to bid, and we did receive bids back that are still under negotiation. So we don't have that data to release yet, but we do have basically a template here. So Acme has been our hauler going way back since I've been here, and we were the only town, so they didn't have a lot of overhead too. So they had a very favorable contract for the town. As you can see here, I included the budget going back to FY18 that has their basically what's called their collection fees are here. And then we have the tipping fees, which we pay Covanta each year to dispose with our waste. And then we have a couple other expenses in here that are minor in the scope of things. So basically, we are meeting with one of the subcommittees tomorrow to negotiate a deal. And we are going to update, I believe Kristen has on the agenda to update the board on the status of these negotiations. Is that right, Tom?
Yes.
Okay.
We're gonna get a short check-in, but
yeah. So we're gonna wait to release information until after we meet with the vendor tomorrow, and then we can update this with a chart.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
Could you just explain that? I'm just looking at what the items are and like what is landfill monitoring and supplies, and I see that supplies had nothing for a few years and then it started having something there. So just like what are those line items?
Yeah, so landfill monitoring, we're required to monitor the old dump, the cap and everything. So we have to pay a company to go out there and make sure it's not leaking hazardous waste or anything into the environment. So
okay, so that's our landfill.
That's our landfill. It's no part of the new contract. And supplies, we buy like stickers and random stuff that we sell for like bulk items and whatnot. So we might have had a supply on hand that we didn't need to purchase any in 18 and 19, but we did start purchasing them again in FY20.
So we're purchasing, I mean, stickers don't cost that much. So I guess I'm sorry, what kind of supplies?
I think stickers is part of this. I can look into it further and just see what else was spent out of there. But if there's any guides or mailings or anything like that, it could have been included in that. So, but I can get more. I'll write that down. I'll get back to you on that.
All right, thank you.
and Dan, on this a section that we can add in the new revenue sources is the pay-as-you-throw discussion. For the information of this group, the Recycling Commission is in sort of a year-long communication campaign explaining the background and sort of what's going on with municipal waste abatement in the Commonwealth. And the other variable here is that the new contract, regardless of who takes it, will require automated pickup. So we're going to move to a bin system sort of regardless, because they'll automatically collect via the bin. So there'll be some discussion about what are the various options for pay-as-you-throw if, for example, people get a bin that's part of their municipal collection, but if they need more than that, they have to purchase separate bags that they would then be able to fill up and put alongside. But more there and a lot more education there. The Recycling Commission is not budget focused in this regard. They're really focused on just reducing our waste footprint, and all the communities that are our neighbors that have adopted this approach of a bin with pay-as-you-throw extra bags have substantially reduced their waste. So they're taking more the angle of we just need to be doing this as a community because of the complication and environmental impact of waste disposal. But there'll be plenty more on that running in parallel to our efforts here.
So one other note on the tipping fees, that's with a company called Covanta. And for us, we only have two possible places to dispose of the solid waste once we collect it. It's Covanta and Willebrator. So we actually teamed up with a bunch of other surrounding communities to have joint negotiations. And we're meeting with Covanta tomorrow to kind of review their proposal for this as well. So all the information should be coming in at one time. See here. So recycling services. Recycling is a little bit different with how it's processed. So back, I want to say 3 or 4 years ago, we contracted with Waste Management, and they have been collecting all of our recyclables in town. We had Republic before that. So basically, they also submitted a bid for this new round of trash and recycling pickup, which would be a 5-year contract proposal moving forward for FY25 to 29. So the way recycling works is that they have this one line item for curbside collection, just like solid waste. That's what they charge to pick up. And then we have disposal services. These are actually the processing fees for what it costs to process a ton of recyclables. And then what they do is they actually net out the value of those recyclables on a monthly basis. So we're getting credit if those recyclables are worth more. So it's pretty interesting. Last year, we have this agreement where we would split anything if we were covering the tipping fee, which is about $108. The town actually made $39,000 by selling the recyclables. However, come end of July, that market crashed for cardboard and paper, and we've been paying, between $63 and probably $80 a ton for recycling. So it has quite the shift in expenses there. So for FY23, our budget is actually $177,000 after supplementing at town meeting twice, I believe, and then doing a budget transfer from solid waste in May. So that's probably about a pretty accurate figure within $7,000 to $8,000. Well, where we'll end up. So as far as I can tell, they're going to continue with that type of agreement moving forward, and basically any value we get after tipping fee is great, but it's highly volatile. It's very hard to budget for, more than anything else, I'd say. So
Dan,
again,
is there any guidance that we'll get that will give us any direction? I know it is a commodity, so hard to know, but like we get energy forecasts, that's also a commodity, but we get them and we use them. Any recycling offset forecast we would get about how the cardboard market or the aluminum market's going to run? So
Roy Boyer, who's with Waste Management, he actually gave us a heads up in July saying that, the market has shifted tremendously for, the cardboard. And that's how we found out, but they don't know until the market actually shifts and crashes. It's kind of like the stock market. You don't know until it happens, unless you know something. So it's very hard to project. We do track it month to month, so we have the data, and the actual amount we're paying per ton has been going down steadily, so it's going in the right direction, but we're still in the 63-ish per ton area. So yeah, it's something you can't really predict. So we just have to be able to supplement when necessary to continue recycling service.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions I just wrote down is for this purpose, though. If you could argue, I guess, that you should use the current number, but if the forecast number is lower than the current number, we don't have a way to forecast that. So
Right.
the open question is, what do we put in for a forecast? And there's some logic if we have an informed guidance to use that. If there's some logic to using what you currently have, but there's not really a logic for having a number that's lower than what you currently have, because then you're making a bet it's going to go down.
We're meeting with the vendor tomorrow, so I can pick his brain, whether or not there's something we could use as a, sort of conservative number moving forward. But
Okay.
I think it's up to the market too. So I don't know if he's gonna have a straight answer for that, but I will ask. Start that.
So the stuff that says FY24, that's a projection, yeah?
Yeah, as much as possible. We budget what we think is going to happen. So the cost has been going down, but I'm pretty sure we will have to supplement this budget at the special town meeting to make it through the March. Yeah, it's really tough to predict because it went up throughout the year, then it dropped. So if it keeps dropping, we could be in pretty good shape. If it goes back up, we would have to supplement more. So basically, the recycling and trash companies, they put the risk all on the town rather than trying to bid something where they were at risk for, the market inconsistency. So all the contracts, I think, are doing this moving forward. All right, and then once we have the updated amounts that are negotiated and it goes to the select board, we can start filling in that data. So we have the amounts we're going to see going forward, but they are pretty substantial increases. All right, next up are energy costs for natural gas, electricity. The select board did sign an agreement for new rates. We did lock in for a 3-year contract. So let's see, starting off with electricity, just gonna go right to the chart here. We locked in at the very bottom of the market last contract about 3 years ago. So, I think we're 2 weeks from the bottom off, which is fantastic. Saved us a lot of money in the meantime. That means when the market shifts, we're going to pay incrementally more in each year. So the good thing is the contract expires December 31st of 2024 for electricity. So we get to sort of work in the increase over 2 years for the electricity increases. So in FY25, we're going to see an overall increase to town and schools about 149,000, and then another similar increase in FY26. So it's hedged, which is nice. And then they did send us a chart, which, here's natural gas as well. This had a larger increase. Natural gas just through the roof, and from what we understand, it's very expensive up in New England just because of supply costs. So it costs a lot to get natural gas here. So this contract actually expires in March of 2024. So we're going to see somewhat of an increase next fiscal year, then the bulk of it's going to be in FY25. That makes sense. And then we broke it down by department here, which I'll zoom in a little bit. So we created a spreadsheet with all the accounts on it and kind of sum these up on a pivot table. And you can see for some departments, it's not earth-shattering the cost of electricity. Schools obviously have the most space in town, so they could be seeing like a $93,000 hit. Again, this is FY25. And then water, of course, has a lot of facilities as well, so the enterprise will absorb those costs in their budget. And again, the table for FY26 looks very similar just because it's a December 31st split. There'll be another $93,000 increase on that. And I'll send you all this so you don't have to write down all these numbers. All right, and then for natural gas, this was little bit more of a larger percentage increase. We did a similar thing, used a pivot table, summed up all the information. Again, the schools have about 47,000 of this expense, the 59 initially. So we can take a look at the budgets and make sure, you know, they're in line with what we're expecting to spend next year. Again, this is March, so most of the winter will be over by then. So hopefully that helps. And then FY25, of course, we have some larger increases because it's there'll be a full year. The schools are at 142,000, followed by highway at 9,300, fire 8,200, and so on. But overall, it's about $179,000 increase. So those are the two we had the most data on so far. Next up,
And as a percent, Dan, just for reference, so the percentage jump that people referencing sort of Prop 2.5 normal migration of budget.
yeah,
It's
yeah. If we jump up to
20% or something.
like natural gas went up 69.7% overall, and then electricity is 40%. So just huge increases based on the market, but that's what we're seeing everywhere. And if you probably saw increases in your home contracts or wherever else, so it's pretty consistent according to the market. But we did lock in at pretty good rates compared to other places due to our joint purchasing power. All right, moving on here. Next up on the list was employee non-union salaries. Most of the workforce is unionized in town, but the department heads on the town side are not, and other like HR positions, Jeremy and payroll and so on. And we're always monitoring the market to make sure that we're in that, that we're paying market wages for those employees. So the town manager and select board review that every year. They haven't done so yet this year. I think Kristen's plan to take something to the board early this fiscal year, but we're still working on gathering market data for that. So, but yeah, it's something we do look at each year just to make sure that we're paying fair wages. It's not much more data to this one. It's just a sort of statement at this point.
So subsequent to the analysis, there might be a number here that says basically subsequent to analysis with our market basket units, we estimate, the correction here to be X.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have all the data. It's just nothing's been authorized yet. So it's pretty easy to pull that number once decision is made. Town and school bargaining union contracts. Of course, this is the biggest thing we're dealing with. Wages make up over 80% of the operating budgets in town because we're a service industry. So we basically, Jenny and I wrote down what's the status of our current contracts. So for the town, basically fire is expiring at the end of FY24. Then our other 5 unions expire at the end of FY25. So we know what the costs are for most of our wages heading into 24 and 25. Beyond that, when we have to submit a 5-year projection, we'll have to use, market data, whatever, to kind of estimate that. On the school side, again, we got unit A, B, and C. They're currently in negotiations, and they're finishing up their 1-year agreement for this year. And then again, unit E has been mediation. That's the teaching assistants. And then we go down to the custodians, and they're sold through FY25.
So we probably can't go into detail on this today, but one thing we'll have to decide, and we may have to have an executive session to do it, is to talk about how we're going to talk about it, because these numbers are going to be the biggest numbers on our budget challenge list. And so we're going to have to give the public some understanding of where they come from and what's driving them and why we think what we think. Some part of that's been presented in public. Well, maybe not. So let me do what I said, and let's hold on that until we're able to have an executive session and talk about how we want to talk about it and what we can share when. But we'll just have to be thoughtful about how we present this, because it's gonna be a big dollar number.
All right, and then next on the list was the health insurance trust. And, just a little background here. Jody, before she left, she took the initiative to begin, she hired a health insurance broker that could help us convert to partially self-insured, to, give us a little more decision-making in our health insurance, which has been great so far. We had a health insurance stabilization fund that we were building over the years. At town meeting, a bunch of times we said that, typically we'd have to budget for a 12% increase, not knowing how the data would come out and how we'd fare going out to bid, which was excruciating to the budget. So we started this health stabilization fund back in 2014, 2015, something like that, and put some money in. So in case we had a higher than expected contract, it bought some time by applying some of these health insurance stabilization funds until we could regroup and move forward and go out to bid again and hopefully get a better rate the following year. So we never actually ended up touching that money. When we did have a bad year, we actually made plan design changes that lowered the rates. So we worked with the unions on that to move forward and keep the health insurance rates lower than they would have been. So anyways, on March 1st, 2022, we actually moved to the officially partially self-funded plan. And in the first 4 months, we were able to grow that balance to just over $2 million. So since that time, our large claims have been triple what we were expecting them to be. So, we had a stop loss provider named Sun Life, and they came in, they bid for us, and they lost a lot of money on our contract in the first year. So we wanted to bid again the following March, and we had two bidders, which are Sun Life and Blue Cross came in well below them, but it was still a $60,000 per month increase. So right now we're actually paying out about $92,000 per month for the last 4 months, more than what we're contributing to it. So we see our balance slowly going down. We're not in danger of defaulting right now, or like going below zero, which we'd have to raise, but we do have to contribute more to the health insurance trust to correct that trend downward. So basically on July 1st, we have our new health insurance budget. The town contribution, we basically take the budget, divide by 12, put 1/12 in each month, and we do that so we constantly have influx of money going in, and we can't contribute all of it at once because we don't have the cash flow to do so. So starting in July, we're going to go from $856,000 per month up to $909,000 per month as a town contribution. And then on November 1st, the trust looks at the health insurance rates, and we'll make adjustments as necessary to make sure that we're funding enough. So with the rates, the employees contribute into the fund as well. Actually 35% for most of the plans. So we'll have open meetings, discuss this, and then come up with a funding option for November 1st.
Dan, is there can our broker, so there's two pieces to this, right? There's the part we pay, and then there's the part that basically the premium for the reinsurance, if you will, the stop loss premium.
Yep.
So is there any way that our broker could help us get a 5-year trend on each of those components? Because what you'd expect is, because of all the excellent work you've done, we used to be like on this trend line, and then we drop down because it's a much more efficient plan, but we're still probably in an upward trend line for each of those two components. Any way we can get our broker to give us any guidance for plans like this, what the trends have been?
Sure. Yeah, so they'll probably use like the current market data. They have all this information on prescriptions and utilizations and whatnot. So yeah, I can reach out to Pam Hicks and see if she can give us some feedback on that, and we'll work with the broker.
Because there were years that our health insurance costs in town went up by 9% or 12% or big numbers. So anything that we think is going to be above Prop 2.5 funding level, we need to identify as a budget hurdle. So that'd be great if you can get whatever trend data we have for the two different building blocks that make up our health insurance cost.
Sure.
We can use that.
Tom, can you repeat what those were? I'm just trying to grapple.
Well, the way this
Components. Sorry.
Right. So there's Dan, you can correct me, but I think the way this policy works is we basically have a kind of a cap that the town will pay And then beyond that, we buy an insurance policy that we pay a monthly premium for, so that anything spikes above what the town has agreed to pay gets paid by the insurance.
Okay,
That's right. So it's called stop loss insurance, and any claims over 125,000 are picked up by our stop loss. And so that's where I was saying Sun Life got hit really hard last year by, the number of claims that Westford had. So our insurance cost for the stop loss went from about 110,000 a month to 173,000 a month.
so the two trends that we're looking for, one would be our outlay and one would be the number of spikes.
Yeah.
What, is that it?
Yeah, and basically, yeah, we have to pay for all the claims that are below the 125,000. So if we have a lot of activity happening, then we're responsible for those claims too. So there's basically we pay a certain amount each month. I think it's $241,000 for just the Blue Cross to pay for claims, and then 173,000 for the stop loss, and then they true up every 3 months. So if we didn't contribute enough, they're going to assess us on that third month, the difference. So, but if we don't spend it all, they send back the difference too. But that only happened in our first month. So since then, we've been underfunded moving forward. So we do have a correction to make there.
Yeah, aside from the timing effects, though, it's basically each individual, the town pays up to 125. And then beyond that, the insurance company paid based on the premium we pay. And then we pay a servicing fee also, but that's sort of a little bit separate. So if everyone in the whole town suddenly got sick to exactly 125,000, the town would be paying at the max ourselves. We'd be paying the insurance premium and not using any of it. But anyway, these plans are pretty widespread and they're very cost effective. So the town saved millions of dollars when it made this migration. And I think the service level is pretty good and I think people are happy with it. So it's a great thing. But I think now that we've gotten all the savings, they're both going to return to some new trend line up that we need to be forecast somehow.
I see. Thanks.
The other thing to note is that the town pools its healthcare expense for all the departments, town and schools. And that becomes confusing when people look at how much the town is spending on schools. People often, when they look at how much are we investing in towns versus municipality, will just look at the school associated budget and then assume everything else is municipal. But that everything else includes a whole bunch of stuff that is really a shared expense, like the health insurance cost. So we'll pick that apart elsewhere in the document, but just useful to know that this is not allocated into the school budget separately and that municipal budget separately. It's pooled and kept separate.
All right. Moving on, next one was the uncertainty of new growth. And does everybody here know how Prop 2.5 works? I'm happy to kind of step through it.
Why don't we go through it, Dan, just because?
Yeah. We're recording anyway, so it's a good point. Yeah. So basically, the town's only allowed to increase the tax levy by 2.5% each year. It's not individual households, it's the entire levy as a whole, with a couple caveats in there. So basically, the formula for doing this, I like looking at numbers, it helps me, but basically looking at the FY24 calculation, we start with the FY23 levy limit, which is 88 million, and then we add 2.5%. So 88 million times 2.5 is 2.2 million here. So that adds on to the levy limit. Then we are allowed to add on any new growth. So, new growth is new construction, new office buildings, whatever. It could be major renovations to homes, like a new kitchen or whatever. So we estimated about 850,000 for FY24. We're probably right around that with where we are with the assessments based on the rough data we have. And then on top of that, we're allowed to add any debt exclusion money. So debt exclusions are it's basically a debt service associated with some of our large capital projects that are excluded. So the library was just authorized in October as an excluded debt project for $23 million. So what happens is, as we start paying for the debt service during construction, that money is added onto the tax levy as well. So it's all kind of tallied up. And we have other projects in town, like the Boston Road Fire Station, the Fletcher Fire Station, and the Cameron Senior Center. That are both the exclusions at this time that are calculated in there. Good news is we just paid off the 3 schools, the Miller, Stony Brook, and the Christofoli, and we're paying off a very small payment on the highway garage next year. So we have all sorts of capacity compared to what we were paying before for debt exclusion going forward. So,
And you give some examples here, but you give
Yeah.
some good examples here, Dan, but just maybe what is new growth? Can you give an example of something that would be considered new growth?
new growth. So yeah, let's go down to this table here. I got some charts here. But back in FY14, that's when Cornerstone came in. So that was a massive influx of new tax revenue coming to the town. The year after, we had Princeton Properties. It's the apartment buildings down 110. They brought in a massive jolt of new growth to us. And then, you know, anything in between that, like any individual households, we have a lot of like 3 and 4 3 or 4 unit housing developments that come up. Those bring in some money. Most houses in town, you know, they're valued when they're new over $1 million at this point. So they do bring in a premium for each one that's built. So you figure, you know, $1 million house is going to be assessed at, you know, $15,000 in new growth per unit. But once you back off the land value, it's probably more like 11,000 or so, 10,000. So, you know, each unit comes in does add quite a bit to the tax base. Again, if building slows down, new growth slows down. We really hit a lull in FY17 to 19. Those are way below what we had been receiving or growing in previous years. And it started to pick up again once Bell Tower started going on 110. So we didn't really have any major projects going in these years. So again, this is a huge swing in tax base as we move forward. So it's very hard to project.
Yeah, that was gonna be kind of my question. Is it like the planning, like, it seems to me that we're running out of space, right, for these in town for new developments, new whatever. So how do we try to pre-plan? Do we have like some estimate of like what's undeveloped land that could be developed? Like, do we have any of that?
So,
sorry, it's a dumb question. I have no idea.
No, not a dumb question at all. This is so I wrote a little paragraph here with Jeff Morris that's helped. We have this article going to the March 2024 town meeting. It's the MBTA communities multifamily housing requirement, which is required by the state. And we could see some significant growth in the future because we're required to produce more housing, multi-unit housing.
Where are we going to put it? This is the conundrum about how your suburban farm town becomes, where houses are all on top of each other, right? Where else do we put the building? And at what point do we kind of run out of desire and space for it? I mean, this one obviously is state mandated. We don't have a choice to figure out where it would happen, but.
Well, the state mandate is just to have a zone, so we don't have to build it. The builders will come and do that, right? So
that's exactly right. And there is a good map that the planning board has that shows this is along 110 corridor, and they've highlighted by color the areas that would become available. So these are areas that are not currently there. In some cases there are houses, but not a lot of houses there. But I think your overall point, Jen, is right. So if we're looking at forecasting longer term, one of the big projects that Dan just mentioned was a big shopping center. We don't think we're going to have room for another one of those. Another one was another surge came related to the 40B builds. So it used to be that if your stock of affordable housing in a given community was below a certain limit, people could bypass the normal planning and zoning board process and build, a whole new complex that included affordable housing. And so some of the projects that were part of a surge was because Westford was below. Westford is now well above that limit. And so while we still may approve more affordable housing and other housing projects, the ability to come in, put a very, very large project outside of the normal planning process is not available anymore. So if we're trying to develop some kind of reasonable forecast of this, we'll probably say, here are the things that might support it. but here are some of the things that might limit it. And the point you bring up, Shannon, is exactly right, that some of the things that might limit it are, we're no longer subject to these 40B exclusions, and Westford's made a choice to be a certain kind of community, and there's not.
Yeah, I mean, what's the appetite to
Limited
keep
space.
putting small developments in every wooded space? And I feel like the appetite in town in general is becoming less and less for that.
Yeah, I think you're right. So Dan, maybe just a note for you when we're talking about this, we may want to, it's hard to forecast this, but we're going to have to forecast something, and we may want to have like a general tailwinds and headwinds about that might help people think about it.
And of course, the idea of zoning something for a big multi-house community has an impact for our schools, right? And if there's another project, we know, I think, from what I've followed, that the current ones, like the bell towers, hasn't created a huge influx into our school systems. But will that trend continue if we build another multifamily housing complex, especially where this one is really geared towards families, right? Is that going to start tipping those scales with our enrollment that we see going down at some point? Does that swing a pendulum back?
Well,
which no one knows.
I think multifamily just means more than one unit together. It's not necessarily families per se with children. So,
Because these are zone multifamily, though, they may be more affordable, but not necessarily, is Stan's point. One of the things we're trying to decide with the planning board is what the low-income affordability requirements will be for any of these new build outs in this zone. So I can't remember what the existing number is. It maybe 15% or something is what they're thinking about, but you could set it, can't set it lower, but you could set it higher if you wanted to. So
I have a question on the, so on the zone, along 110, if there's been discussion about maybe repurposing some of the commercial buildings as people go remote, et cetera, and, less retail. If that were to happen, would we really be able to call it new growth since it's existing revenue in one bucket, and then it would be a different bucket, but is it a net zero for us in terms of revenue?
not necessarily. If they have an extensive capital fit up in one of those buildings, like that's new growth. That does happen yearly where companies, redevelop their space and whatnot. But once like a commercial property is on the tax rolls, if it becomes vacant, it's taxed less, and then that burden is actually shifted. It doesn't go away. It doesn't decrease the tax levy. It's shifted to the residential typically. So
so those
higher percentage.
So those vacant buildings get taxed lower, and then that in turn gets passed to the residents.
Yep. So there's a different basis with how commercials assess. It's on the income approach rather than the assessed value. So if they're vacant, they're paying less taxes. So yes, for residents, vacant buildings are bad.
So I ask a follow-up question when we're talking about budget, revenue streams. Is that like a state mandated law, or is that something that we do as, for businesses when they're vacant?
It's state mandated, the way they're assessed.
Yeah, seriously, it's not our fault they're vacant.
Yeah, we can't make this stuff up how we tax ourselves. We have to follow the laws. So
that's why I ask. Is there a law for that?
The Economic Development Committee has awarded some ARPA funding to hire a consultant to come in and help us do kind of a baseline opportunity assessment for Westford on the commercial side. So I don't know if the timelines will line up, but there may be some initial findings there, some initial high level view there that would give us some insight into what additional opportunities there were. And somehow we'll have an FAQ section of this at some point. Dan, I get the question all the time. My assessment for my house has gone up by 10%. The town's flush with money. What are you even talking about? And it may just be worth explicitly to explain, okay, this is the levy, and this is the max we can charge cumulatively. So if your individual assessment has changed and you're paying more than 2.5% in a given year, that could happen. But the cumulative is capped, because I just, people look at me blankly, like, what do you mean the cumulative is capped? It may be a little bit weird for people that used to live somewhere else that have moved in.
Right. So, the assessments are actually based on market sales. So it's from actually 18 months ago. So if we see like an increase in, the sales on housing on Nabnasset Lake that's waterfront, that could increase houses that are waterfront townwide just because of the sales data. And that means they could be paying a higher share of the taxes, and people who aren't on the waterfront could be going down. That's just an example. I'm not saying that happened. But it is. So the tax levy is like a macro level where that increases by 2.5%. And how it's divided occurs in the assessors department, where they look at the market transactions, the values of the houses and all the real estate in town, and they divvy up the tax levy based on the assessments in town. So it is possible if a person's not maintaining their home and it's degrading year after year, they'll be paying less in taxes because their assessed value is going down. If your property is having improvements, it could be considered new growth, put like a new kitchen in or something like that, the value could be going up, and therefore you'd be paying more than a 2.5% increase. So 2.5% does not apply to each individual household. There's a lot of different factors controlling that.
So again, just thought process questions. So we have some overlapping space, right, on 110 that's commercial versus residential. So is there some thought of taking some of these vacant buildings and see if anyone would be interested in converting them to housing that would then balance off some of that revenue stream?
So there are developers. So I think part of the IBM complex is going to be redeveloped as housing, right, over in Littleton. I may have heard
Yeah,
that.
I think so.
So if a developer comes in and they make a proposal, then absolutely that could happen. But the town doesn't usually have a way, other than just doing the normal marketing that towns do through their economic development councils or committees. It's not so easy for the town to seek that opportunity. It's sort of
get this vacant building, please.
Well, believe it or not, that's what the Economic Development Committee does, is it talks to realtors and talks to people who, are in the market to know who's looking for space to say, hey, we got some good stuff. It's a good opportunity here. So we could be doing much better, but there's not so much of a mechanism for, part of the reason to hire this consultant is so that we can develop some tools to
pull
be
those
better at attracting people to what we have. But that's
Would
really the
seem
only
that we want more housing. We have too many vacant properties. Is there some way to flip some of that existing space into more meaningful revenue, which would be more tax revenue?
right.
Especially because our residential and commercial are at the same tax rate, right? So if we're paying a lower tax rate because it's vacant, then having it be a residential property would increase the tax amount, I think.
Yeah,
following all the things correctly.
No, you're exactly right. And what would have to happen is a developer would have to come in and say, okay, we love this. We love the Westford schools. We love this way this building's laid out. And then they would go to the planning board and go through the normal process to get it.
And I'm sure it's more hassle too to revamp an existing property than it is to build net new on a vacant lot too. So that's probably something that's less enticing.
Sometimes, but I think the big part of the big IBM complex at 110, 495 intersections being redeveloped as housing. So it does happen. So it could be a good fit for us, but we'd need a developer to identify that as a target. We wouldn't have a way to spur that on ourselves except for letting people know it's there.
All right, should we move to the next one?
Yeah, please.
All right, keep this going here. Bus contract. So Jenny wrote this, sent it over. I just merged these into two documents, but basically 24 is the last year of the bus contract, where there's $445 for a regular bus and $135 for after school activities. So based on the market that the market research schools have done, they've been seeing $495 per bus, which is an 11% increase. So the schools do charge a bus fee right now, but certain grades, 6th grade and below, who are more than 2 miles from their school, the schools have to provide transportation for them for free. So it's definitely going to hit the budget as well. Won't just be paid by a fee.
And
Chris,
this
did I
is
get that right?
Yes, that is all correct, Dan. Nice
All
job.
right. Just
Wait,
checking.
You're saying it won't be paid by a fee or?
So certain students, if you're in 6th grade and lower, you live more than 2 miles from your school.
Right, yeah, no, I'm aware.
Yeah, that's
So there's no get, no, there, yeah, so we're not looking to increase fees yet. As we looked at all of our fees this last year, we're not looking to increase the fees. It's not, that's not outside of the conversation. But when we reviewed our fees this year, it was before we knew that the potential 11% increase based on what other towns were doing. So what he's saying is that it's not necessarily going to all be absorbed by fees, based on students who do pay fees and students who don't pay fees.
And the state mandate includes 6th grade, is that correct?
Yes, it does.
So random.
This is another one we'll have to figure out how we talk about it while it's still in negotiation, because there is a dollar value impact here, as well as a dollar value offset when we talk about fees potentially.
Correct.
So we can make a note of that too, but if we're gonna highlight this as a need to the taxpayer, we're gonna have to figure out how we talk about it. I guess, at what point, let me ask a different question. Chris, at what point do you expect to have the contract settled on transportation?
That's a great question because we finalized the last year of our the fifth year this spring. So we're anticipating doing this starting over the summer and into the fall to figure out what the next potential contract would look like.
Okay, so by end of year, you may have a number or may not, and we'll have to find some way to talk about a number if we haven't settled a contract.
Exactly. I mean, we'll have to before the end of, before we get into FY25. Hopefully by before December, if that was the end of the year you were meaning.
Yeah, so you're right. We will definitely have a number we're using as part of the fiscal 25 planning process, which is what we're talking about here. So, okay,
Right.
So we'll have a number that we're using for budgeting that we can use for this purpose. Got it.
all right. And next up was the special education fleet leases. So Jenny just wrote a paragraph here saying that the original 18 vans, the lease was signed over 15 years ago and maintenance is becoming an issue. So they want to sign a new lease. Chris, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah. So we've actually, we have a lot of our vans apparently for a number of years now. We've held on to the vans and didn't renew the leases, so we didn't get new vans. We've just continued to pay the lower lease rate for an older van. So it's problematic. We have a lot of maintenance concerns that are happening with them. We've been looking to see, how we might transition some of them into electric vehicles, if that is, if that's something that we could handle financially, because we know that would be a really big commitment that the town has as well too, to do something like that. So we're looking at significant needs within all of our special education vans. And at one point, we own our van fleet, but they don't actually supply all of our special education transportation, because we do have to contract with our current larger yellow bus contractor for some of those special education runs, because we don't have enough vans to cover everything. Our vans, the majority of our vans cover our in-district transportation to the schools for the most part. We do some of the out-of-district transportation as well. And one of the things that we look at is, when is it saving us money to actually use our own van, or is it less expensive for us to contract out? And there is a tipping point there. So we look at that equation as well too, as we're looking to see how many vans do we need? Should we be replacing them? Should we not be replacing them? Those are a lot of different conversations that we'll be having around our special education in-house fleet.
So for the purposes of this, we'll develop a dollar cost estimate at some point.
Yeah, we know what the potential maintenance is. We know what potential new leases would cost, whether we went with the current gasoline or if we went electric. So we do have that where we can scope it out. The problem is we don't actually know what the priorities of the maintenance issues are yet. So we have to really look at that to have the best cost for the next couple of years.
Maybe for each of these, Dan, we could have a range of potential financial impact bullet or call out at the bottom. And a lot of them will be blank for now, but it'll remind us that we, in the end, need some sort of range of outcome for each.
Okay, yeah, we can work on that. Put that down. Okay, then the last budget challenge, not the last, I'm sorry. Next is feasibility study outcomes, which was just released last week by the schools. Jenny just had a note here that, the statement of interest for the Robinson School was submitted to the MSBA, which is the Massachusetts School Building Authority. They subsidize a lot of large school building projects. So Chris, I don't know, again, if you want to elaborate at all.
So along with the feasibility study, one of the major outcomes is a 10-year capital plan assessment as well too, or needs looking at what our priorities should be. And so what we can do is we can really put a much more detail here, because like the MSBA, most of the major things that have been identified, those would all fall into the capital debt excluded category that Dan was talking about earlier. But there are also things that are on the lists that would not necessarily be debt excluded. And so we can separate that out and we could say, look, if we know that we find ourselves needing to build a new school, it could potentially cost X amount of money. If we are renovating something, it could cost X amount of money. For all of our 9 schools, we have a 10-year list that, has a very significant dollar sign attached to it. And we're going to be also doing presentations about this in the fall at the strategic planning retreat as well too, kind of talking about that. My thing about the feasibility study is that I keep reminding people that this study gave us all these recommendations, and now the school committee needs to develop the master plan to see, okay, well, which things do we think we should be looking at? Because if we just give the dollar price without going through that process, I think it would be shocking.
Okay, so we'll have some range again of impacts over, say, 3 to 5 years of non-debt excluded capital requirements that have been suggested by this and endorsed by the school committee.
So should we include the debt excluded ones too, because they do impact the tax rate?
I think
Yeah.
we just separate them. We'll just make sure that we separate it so they can see the difference.
Yeah. We're on a school run here. So next up is the special education tuitions. So the OSD, they increased their tuition rates by 14% this year. At the time the budget was passed, we were not sure what was going to happen with this in March. And yeah, so Chris, this is official now, is it?
Well, it is. The problem here is that they approved other people's ability to raise their rates to 14%. So it's safe to assume that everyone would do that, but it isn't just across the board. Every single private special education school is automatically raising their rates by 14% in 1 year. So one of our challenges was we really needed to see what the rate increase was going to be for the schools where we are sending our students. And so what we know is that impact for FY24, we're able to pay with one-time funds, but throughout the course of FY24, we will then be building in what the actual cost ended up being for FY25, because that's when it'll need to be the the ongoing rate, once we know for sure what everybody's increases have been. And honestly, some of those are still being determined right now. But what we know is that they gave them the green light, so we would be surprised if people didn't go all the way to the 14%.
That makes sense. So we should, there's some trend line. It's not immediate, but
That's right. And we'll know what it is. Again, similar to the bus contract, we'll know as we're developing FY25 what that specific target is. So we'll know that, we'll have that even more, we'll have that information before we even have the bus information.
can you remember offhand, Chris, what this line item is in terms of dollars? I'm just trying to position this in my head.
Well, our overall, in general, the special education tuitions they actually get close to $5 million. But the increase itself was, I think we were looking at, I think we were potentially projecting around $900,000.
Okay, so a big number.
It's a big number. That's what our initial projection was, but we really want to, we're still looking at that.
Okay. So that'll hit the big board.
Yeah,
a lot of these are important, but small. I mean,
Right.
nothing small. $100,000 is a lot of money, but things that are really going to rock us or things like that.
Right. When Dan mentioned our fuel, the energy costs, I didn't break a sweat because I knew special education was coming.
I don't know. All I know is that this whole call gave me agita. I feel like I'm having it's just like the dollar signs on the pages over and over again. How are we going to find it all?
Yes.
So that's the end of the document so far. So I'll get this out to everybody. So if we want to discuss further, dive into it more on Wednesday before our group meeting, that'd be great.
Yeah, Dan, great job. And what a great first cut. So I think that gives us a lot of things to focus on and is a really good launch pad. So yeah, please send off the PDF that people go through, send your more detailed questions or suggestions. And also we should be building an FAQ list. So if you just have questions looking at it, like, boy, a member of the public's going to wonder what this is. Just if we can just keep funneling those to Dan, in the end, we'll figure out what the best format to get those out is, but those would be really valuable too.
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing I wanted to spend a little bit of time on today is the new revenue source list. And Shannon, I know you signed up to work on that. I'm wondering if we should take another look at that list and divide things up so that a couple people are working on them, or what do you think?
Yeah, so I spent some time yesterday reading through, I think in the right place, for what Dan had mentioned about going into the folders there with all the different towns, and what they had put in there. I found that most of them were really just about the Prop 2.5 override, and there wasn't really a lot of reference to other things that they considered beyond that decision to go into the override. So a lot of the documents in there were just justifying the Proposition 2.5 override request versus saying, like the Hingham one, like these are the other places that you can look, or these, and it didn't really talk about like these are other things that we considered before we went to the Proposition 2.5 override, and that was like how we got led to that choice. So I didn't find a ton in there. I don't know if I can screen share. I wrote up a little something. Let me see if it'll let me know. I don't think I can screen share. But I can.
Dan may be able to let you do it, or if you want to
Yeah, he
email it.
just did.
Okay.
Yep, sorry, I was on mute. I just made you co-host.
All right, let me just see. I Zoom screen share like 24/7 for work, but never from my personal Chromebook. So let's see.
You're on mute, Jen. I don't know if you meant to go on mute or not. Shanna, you're on mute. Don't know if you mean to be or not.
Not sure she can hear us, Tom.
Yeah. Shanna, can you hear us?
Okay.
It's when sharing. Shannon, do you want to email it to me real quick? I'll put it on my screen, and that way you can walk through it. Okay.
Yeah, can you
you
hear
are.
me now? It said it muted my microphone and it doesn't allow you to speak while you're doing it. So yeah, I can send that over, but I mean, I read through all the documents and I just pulled any reference to anything that mentioned something that they looked at, and then a list of the stuff from Hingham.
Well, good. That sounds like a great approach. And
There just wasn't a lot to go on in those documents, unfortunately. And I read every one of them.
wow, well, you're ahead of me. I've read a bunch of them, but I haven't read all of them.
That's a lot of material there.
It was, you know, a little bit of a boring Sunday yesterday where I sat trying to read through a lot of that stuff, just looking for hints of anything that we could utilize. But again, a lot of them just really referenced the path to the prop and justifying why they were doing it versus necessarily coming up with innovative suggestions, which is, I think, partially what I mean, it sounds like obviously we're going to have a consideration about a Proposition 2.5 override being part of our suggestion, but I'm not sure if that's the end all be all, right, of the one and only thing that we should be tracking, right? Where else are we gonna, because we just looked at a real long list of items that is going to be a lot of money. So and some of these we may do already, but I'm just obviously not savvy about all the town stuff. But the Belmont document had referenced like facility rental fees, like were there any other town buildings that we could rent, any other space that we could rent for fees. Brookline talked a little bit somewhere about maybe a composting program to help with the trash costs. Eastham had mentioned short-term rental fees. I don't know if we do them, but I also don't know how much short-term rentals we really have in town. Probably not enough. That may be one of those things that would be low return. Lots of people are getting into the cannabis and marijuana as a revenue source. So that came up for Eastham, Fairhaven, Grafton, Hopedale, Northampton. All of those towns had referenced adopting or putting in cannabis or marijuana stores. And then the Hingham, Grafton also talked about facility rentals. I don't know how much we do or don't do of that. That's a lack of my own ignorance and education. And then Hingham obviously had a bigger list, like looking at the split tax rate. I don't know how much percent we're doing for meals tax, but maybe there's an opportunity to increase there. They talked about license and permit fees. Was there an opportunity to increase real estate transfer fees? We touched on that in an earlier meeting, that possibility of instituting something like that. Are we at the highest percentage of room occupancy fees or not? If there's an opportunity there. Cell tower rentals, I think we do some of that, but I don't know the extent of that. They talked about transfer station fees, which I think you mentioned in your email, Tom, but I already put the same thing, was we don't have a transfer station, but that might be applicable to that, might be the pay as you use trash fees. They talked about the school activity fees and checking if they're in line. Sounds like we did that last year and made sure that we were in line where we wanted to be. So maybe that's not an option, but they talked about naming bylaws fees and, essentially maybe the Norman E. Day School becomes the Comcast school or something, and then they also were looking into solar panel fields. So that was the kind of main bulleted points that were in the Hingham one. Hopedale had similar property. Hopedale had mentioned when was the last time they had done property assessments to make sure that the tax rates were fair. Sounds like, Dan, maybe that's an ongoing kind of item, but I don't know when we last did like legitimate property assessments.
It's mandated every 5 years by the DOR
Wow.
to go through the full roll of.
So
Yes.
maybe in theirs, they were at the longer end of doing it. Then they also brought up the fee for service trash and or leaf removal as well, a fee service for that. Northampton was just basically their only reference was marijuana. Reading, there was some suggestion by a townsperson, by a community member about a property tax work-off program. So those, more senior citizens or folks that were in some sort of a property tax exemption could do a work-in program where they could volunteer at town hall in certain capacities that would help lower budgets in other areas to offset the property tax exemption. And there was a reference to Sudbury having a similar program.
We do as well already.
Do we?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, so basically I just looked like in their budget line items when they were talking about revenue, was there something that they listed in there that we didn't, either I didn't know whether we had or whether it was something we might look into, and then if they referenced any other potential sources. But most of those documents were all really just geared towards the existing guidance of the Proposition 2.5 and why it was a good idea and why they were politicking for it. So it wasn't as much as I hoped to find in there.
If I could jump in for a second, this is great. I'm so happy that you were able to do that and read all of those. We started a facility rentals program this last year for the schools specifically. So that's something that we can look and see how that went even in the first year, and we can kind of talk a little bit more about that, because that could be something that we could explore more even with other buildings as well. And when I had talked about the fees earlier, what we decided to start doing is that with our finance subcommittee on the school committee, we decided that we were going to be reviewing all of the fees annually outside of the budget process, because we didn't want to be just raising fees in response to a budget need. We wanted to make sure that it was in line with what we thought that they should be. So it also doesn't mean that we can't go back and review them again now that if we do have a specific need. We just decided we felt like it was kind of, the fees kept coming up only in relationship to a budget need, and we decided we wanted to separate that. So we just do it on an annual basis outside of the budget season.
So maybe where we could go is, I think there's one other thing on our action list, which is to identify some communities that we want to talk to and develop a question list. So between Dan is a full plate doing all this, but I wonder if anyone is called to the idea of identifying other communities and developing the question list, because when we're done, maybe we have assignments for that, and then probably at least one person teaming up with Shanna to sort of flesh these out with some language and some high-low estimates.
Tom, I did speak to Kristen briefly before this meeting started and theirs ended, and I believe they are working on a set of questions as well. Maybe on Wednesday when we get back together, we can compare questions and kind of come up with one set. But I know they're starting to reach out for questions for both department heads and the market.
Yeah, if I had to pick one or two people to call for innovative communities that might teach us something about creative revenue raising, I would ask you and Kristen, Dan. So maybe we do need your help or advice in terms of things you've seen in the groups that you're part of. Unless anyone else has any interesting insights, I don't know of any. We communicate with our peer boards and adjacent communities about disputes usually, but I'm not aware of anybody that I would flash to mind like, wow, they're nailing it. They've really come up with some innovative solutions there.
I agree with you, Tom. I feel like if we end up with suggestions as to who we might talk to, then it would be easier for us to divide and conquer and help have those conversations. But you're right, outside of my connection with other school departments, and I'm talking to superintendents all the time, I wouldn't necessarily know which towns we should be identifying. So I'd be happy to be a part of that process once someone points us in that direction, or I could be doing something separate, getting more school information. But I feel like we have a lot of that on the school side already, just based on the DESI and on the DART information already.
Erica, do you have any feelings about any of this work, or which way you'd like to lend a hand?
Did you say me?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I have a thought of what I'd like to do, and I don't know if I can share my screen so I can show you.
sure. As long as you don't automatically mute.
I'll try. Okay.
All right, just made you a co-host.
Probably my version of Zoom or something.
All right. Can you see this?
Yep, and we can hear you. So
Fantastic.
2 for 2.
So what I was thinking was that it would be good to have, so Hingham referenced a tool that they used in order to walk through various scenarios that would allow them to, weigh the pros and cons of, different alternatives. And so what I thought might be good was, in order to get a handle on the gap that we're trying to cover and the impact of various remedies on that gap, would be to try to construct some sort of tool ourselves. So I just started playing yesterday with an Excel sheet. I think I'd mentioned at a previous meeting the idea of using a Monte Carlo simulation. I don't know if anyone here is familiar with what that is, but it would require some sort of input like this, where we would, these are the challenges that Dan just walked through, as well as, the last one is the unknown unknowns, as well as inflation, some revenues that I knew of, so I stuck them down here, and then identifying what is the minimum, the most likely, and the maximum that we would likely have from that. So how big is the health insurance trust issue? How big would the special, so we can say most likely it's going to be right around here is the cost impact, but it could be as big as this or as little as this. And the value of doing this would be, as I said, walking through various scenarios when we try to figure out what to do about it, and what would the impact be on the bottom line. And I lost the bubble was, and there's also another benefit I was about to say.
Yeah, no, I've used tools like this before for all kinds of analysis, and that this would be a great add, I think. So
I was hoping to do some, just some research on how to construct this tool, maybe look at the Hingham one. I think they had a link to it, so I imagine they have something online that I could see how they went about it. I did start looking up on how to run Monte Carlo simulations on Excel, which would allow us to do this. So that was what I figured my action item would be.
okay, got it. So maybe on the revenue source item, Chris, if you could take the ones that are school related that I think you've already done some work on, which I think are bus fee and the student fees.
Yep.
That would be terrific.
Mhm.
Shannon has to go in 2 minutes, so we'll wrap up here pretty quick.
So just to say a quick clarification, when you do those, it sure would be nice if I got a maximum, most likely, and minimum amount of revenue that we would get from each of those.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. So if you saw on her sheet, if you give a range that includes those three numbers, 10%, 50%, 90% confidence, sometimes it'll just be one number because it'll be a contract. We've already settled. But if it is a range of outcomes, I think that'd be very valuable. Shannon, maybe could you just divide up the rest in half, and you can send me half to do a little development on in terms of writing out a text bullet for the revenue sources.
Yeah.
And then we can just split it up.
No, do you want me to just email you directly? Because
Well, it sounds like everyone else has got action items. So if Chris takes on the two school related ones, you and I could split up the remaining new revenue ideas and do kind of what Dan did, come up with a little bullet
Alert.
explaining what it is, what the range of outcomes might be.
And that's okay. You and I can communicate together via email because
Yep.
it's just two of us, right? I just wanted to make sure I don't. Okay.
And on our last action item, which is to pick towns to interview, let's follow Dan's suggestion and see what the other group comes up with. And we can look and see if we feel like that's a good group. And in the meantime, I'll ask Kristen if she's aware from her connections of anyone different from the group they're developing that is particularly innovative in terms of revenue that she's aware of. And if they are, we can either add to the list or pursue them in addition. I think so. If our goal was to make sure we had all the action items laid out with some sort of deadline, I guess we don't have a deadline really for Dan, you're already well along, and I think the deadlines will just suggest themselves from what you've done. On the new revenue sources, I don't know, maybe Shanna, for a week from Wednesday, do you think we could take a crack at developing a draft?
Sure. Give
Okay.
it our best.
That'd be great. Yeah, if we could split them up by Wednesday, I'll work between that Wednesday and the next Wednesday doing a little bit of drafting.
Okay. Great.
Anything else for today? We can probably break here if I know Shanna stop off, so.
I don't know, Dan, if you have any of the items that you walked through, the max, min, and most likely, I wouldn't mind getting those.
Do you mind sending a spreadsheet over just so I can see it while we're working on it? And I'll try to work on those, but some of the costs are going to be set, so it's going to be the same for all three, which is nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll do what I can to fill it in.
Yeah, and there's also the description column, and the notes column can help to inform whatever it is that you want to add on. So you can just explain, oh, this is already a contract.
Sure. If you send that to me, I'll put it on a shared folder and make sure Chris has a copy too for,
Fantastic.
and then we'll go from there.
Okay, great.
Great.
And I will also take the action item of trying to figure out our strategy for how we talk about things for unsettled contracts not yet settled. I have an idea, but I want to check and make sure it's okay before we march forward with it.
Sounds good.
And Tom, if you have any insight, if you've already done work with these tools that you have, anything you know would be helpful.
Okay, great. Happy to help. I think we're okay to adjourn. Any concerns? Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay, all in favor? Okay, great. We're adjourned for now. Thanks for making the time today, and we'll hop back on Wednesday. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.